Individually, each progressing mandala is so beautiful. And when shown together, it is such a gorgeous display. So I'm thinking an online art show on my website is in order after this project, just so you can see all of them all put together. So I'll be sure to set that up. Welcome to Mandala Unplugged Part 4. I'm Myhre, and today I'm going to show you how to work some Oya in a different pattern than I showed in my crocheted series. And Oya, if you remember, is a Turkish edging. It's crocheted with beads. We'll go ahead and stitch that to the background, and then we're going to work some glue turned applique this time, just to show you there's other ways to turn those edges of applique other than the freezer paper and starch method. So here's what you'll need for today. Okay, so today we're going to start with the Oya, and you'll need either size 8 or size 5 thread, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in that section. You're going to need a needle or a piece of wire to string your beads on, a crochet hook around a size 7 or 8, that's a US 7 or 8 steel hook. You can see how small that guy is. The beads that you'll need are H and G. G is for the outer fan, so you'll need about 400 beads for that. And then H is for the little base of the flower, and you'll need about 200, 250 for those, depending on how many fans you do. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there. This is for turning the glue turned applique. You're going to need your templates that you could download from my website, of course, and myhrequilts.com. H and F. Your turning tools. These are applique tools. The applique glue, which is either Quilter Select or Applique, are my favorites. Your fabrics E through I, and then your one-sided fusible product that you're going to be using to turn your edges. And this is from Applique. You can also get Print in Piece Fuse Light. All of this stuff can be found at thequiltshow.com with Alex Anderson and Ricky Tim. So if you just go to their website and hit the shop button, you can one-stop shop, get your glue, your tools, and your fusible. For those who are crocheting the Oya, what we're looking at here, there's a couple choices in thread sizes. These are size 8. These are more like size 5. 8s are smaller. So the top 1, 2, 3 pieces of Oya that I did was with a size 8. And when we stretch those out, we're looking like we're getting about 4.5 inches. Okay? These two were done with size 5. Looks like we're getting about 5.5. This one, 5.25. So it's always going to depend on the hook that you use, your crocheting, if it's loose or tight. So go by color. If you bought a kit from me, some of them have 8 and some of them have closer to 5. So it doesn't really matter too much because we're going to be able to adjust the size in other ways, and I'm going to show you how to work that. Again, this is the size hook that I used for every single one of these. It is a size US 7, a 1.5 millimeter. There are also 8s, 1.6 millimeter, 1.7. It can be a little confusing. Use the one that you can find. You know, you can drive yourself crazy trying to find this exact same hook, and even if you found it, yours would come out totally different than mine because you might crochet a little tighter or looser than me. So just get a little, maybe get a couple. These things are like $2 or $3. If you decide to get something with a handle on it, those might be more like $6 or $7, but they're nice because they're easier to grab onto. Okay, so that's hook size. Now beads, here's the deal with beads. Beads are causing a little bit of consternation, and it's easy to do because you know, if you're a knitter or if you're a quilter, you haven't delved into the bead world yet. So these are what I use for Oya almost exclusively. They're a size 8 seed bead, and you can tell they're tiny, tiny. Look, they're about 1/8 of an inch. All right. The reason I love the seed beads is if you can tell on the camera, see the holes are big enough to accommodate the size 8 and the 5 threads. If you go to these beads, and like this is a crystal, this is a 4 millimeter crystal. It's bigger than an 8, but the hole size is too small. We could never get a size 4 millimeter crystal onto a size 5 thread bead with the needle and all that. It'd be really difficult. This is a cube. I believe it's a 4 millimeter cube, and same thing, the hole on these are smaller than the holes on these. So not only are we talking about bead size, we're talking about the whole size. So size 8 seed beads are the ones to get. And again, fusionbeads.com, awesome resource. They have all kinds of great colors. If you want to crochet and you don't want to use beads, you could always crochet a piece and then add beads on later. Let's say you really love the crystals, but they don't fit on the thread. You can always sew crystals on or any kind of bead on after the fact. So even if you're using this lace and you're not crocheting along, this is a great place to add some beads. You know, you can pop a bead right in the center, you can put a bead here. Just get creative and use what you have. As always, I'm always a proponent of that. We'll be obviously talking much more about this when we go to Salmon, but I wanted you to be aware that it's important to do one piece first and hold it up to your mandala and see what you want to do. I mean, some of you might be saying, you know, I spent a lot of time on my leaves. I don't want them covered, which is absolutely valid. So rather than doing 7, now this is the size 5, and as you can see, this is going to come down a little further. It's bigger. So let's say you don't want the, you don't want to cover your leaves. So rather than making a 7 motif piece of Oya, you're going to make a 5. And what that'll do is that'll have that, you know, you'll have your third one, your middle one here, and then just 2 coming down, and they'll just touch the leaf and not quite cover them. And that's just as beautiful. And then you don't need quite as many beads here. So, let's go ahead and get started on Oya. Use the materials that you have, you know, gather a couple different things and make a couple of these. They really only take about 20 minutes a piece. So it's not a huge investment of time. And you know, you're kind of designing here, and designing is problem solving, I always say. So I'll teach you how to make the Oya, and then from there you can decide how many motifs you want to make. And don't be afraid if you made a 5 and you're like, no, you know, I really want a 7, or vice versa. You can reuse the thread, you can reuse the beads. But right now what we're doing is, you know, you kind of have to go into it like, okay, I'm experimenting here. Once you know which one you want to do, then you just make 8 of them. So just looking at this piece of Oya, what we're going to be doing is crocheting with these first and these second. So we have to string them in reverse order. So if you're having trouble finding a needle that will accommodate the beads and the yarn and all of that, all you have to do is take a piece of wire. This is a tiny little gauge wire. Fold it in half, put your thread onto your fold, cut the ends so they're even, it's just easier to string, and then you can start stringing on your beads. If you already know you're doing a 5, go ahead and put on 35. Each fan has 7 beads, and so 7 times 5 is 35. If you're doing a 7-piece Oya, go ahead and string on 49. So it's just a little easier to keep track of this if you just, you know, have groups of 7 lying there, and so you can just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for my 7 fan motif. Now I'm going to go ahead and string on the first beads that we're going to crochet, which is H. And you need, if you're doing a 7, you need 28, and obviously if you're doing a 5, you're going to need 20. So we're going to start with a slip knot. Remember the one that's crossing over? Goes up through the hole. That resulting loop goes on your hook. Okay. First thing you're going to do is chain 10. Now if you're not used to working this small, and it is very small, it may take you a little bit of practice, and that's okay. And you know, even if you want to go a little bit bigger hook, bigger thread, and just make 5, it'll look amazing. So whatever you're comfortable with, but work loosely here. 1, 2, 3. Now I'm assuming this isn't really a crochet lesson, so I'm assuming you already know how to crochet if you're attempting this. If you don't, I did a 4-part crochet video series in November, so you could check that out. All right, but here we're going to crochet 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Once you have 10, you're going to push 4 beads up. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 beads all the way up to your hook. Kind of tuck up behind, and then take your hook and make a chain. Make a chain so that the beads sit there like a little quad. Now, here's I think that probably the toughest part of this whole thing is what we want to do is work down this stem a little bit. So we're going to work 3 slip stitches. So what you want to try to do is find that flat part of that chain, and there it is right there. This is going to get real turny and twisty on you. And I would not stress too hard about finding the exact one to go into. This is a wiry little guy, and you're not going to see a lot of it. We're going to be able to manipulate this when we sew it down. So you're going to find the first chain that you can go into and pull your yarn through both. That is a slip stitch. And we're going to do that 3 times down the stem a little bit. The next one, somewhere in there. I'm not trying to be like really crazy about it because you can't really tell. The next one, somewhere in there. Okay, what we really want to have after these 3 slip stitches here is just a little stem with beads that are hanging off. And don't worry if you've got that loose here little guy there, that's what we're going to work our double crochets into. You don't want it too much bigger than what I'm showing right here. Okay, so from there, chain 10 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Remember, repeating from the star, chain 10, pull 4 beads up, 2, 3, 4. And if you're working on a little bit bigger thread than I am, a size 5, that you have to pull them up. They're not going to just slide around like this. This is a much smaller thread than a 5. It's an 8. And again, chain, bring those 4 beads up, slip stitch to join, and you can kind of manipulate them into that little quad there. All right, slip stitch 3 down the stem. You're not yarning over here, it's not a single crochet, it's a slip stitch. So you're just going in, find your yarn and bring it through both. It's tiny, I know. Teeny tiny. All right, so we've got our little stem with our quad of beads, second one. And what you're going to do is work that all the way, repeat from the pattern until you have 7 or 5, whichever one you're doing, stems, and then go ahead and chain 10 at the end, and then we'll be ready for round 2. Alright, so once you finish row 1, you'll have something that looks like this, and they are going to be twisty and turny and kind of crazy, and that's okay. We can deal with those as we crochet back on them. So row 2, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then your chain 10 at the end. Turn it, and before we start with the other beads, what we're going to do is just kind of make sure that that is laying flat. And then we're going to work at the top, middle, of these beads, so sort of like right in there. And the first thing we're going to do is do a double crochet just to get in there. So again, I'm working in the top. Double crochet is yarn over, bring the yarn through the top, yarn over, bring it through 2, yarn over, bring it through 2. All right, so now we can start putting on the beads. Let's get that out of the way. What I do is I'll pull up all 7 that I need. Have these 7 beads at the ready, so on this side of your hand, just 7. That way you don't even really have to keep track. Right after your double crochet, what you're going to do is slide 1 bead up, and then chain 1 to keep it in place, and make sure that that bead is on the back side of your hook. Because what we're doing right now, we're working on the wrong side, so all of the beads will pop up on the right side, on the other side. Okay, so chain 1 to lock that bead in place. Work another double crochet right next to that first one, making sure you're in the top of those beads. So double crochet, slide a bead up. I just take my thumb and I slide it all the way up to my hook, and then chain 1. Again, making sure that bead is behind the hook, not in front of it, because we want all those beads to pop out on the other side, remember. Okay, chain 1, double crochet back in that same spot. So we're making a little fan with a bead on top of each one. Double crochet, pull up a bead, chain 1. And it's little, so just be patient with yourself. Little tiny. Double crochet, pull up a bead, chain, whoop, get that bead back there, 1. What we're doing is we're making as many double crochets on here as we have beads in our hand, except for the last one. All right, so here's number 6. Same as always, chain 1 to lock it in place, double crochet. When you have that 7th bead, go ahead, pull it up, lock it in place. But rather than double crochet in that same spot, we're going to move down the line and double crochet in the top of the next strand. And then we start that all over again, pulling up 7. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Get those out of there. Make sure that these are available. And then just follow your pattern. So what we have at the end here is we've got 2, 4, 6 at the top of each fan. And the 7th one is that little bead that's going to be connecting the fans down underneath. All right, so let's start another one. And then I'm going to work to the end. And we'll see what we have when we're done. So I have my 1 double crochet up here. Pull up a bead, it's a little slippery, and this is the cotton. The rayon ones are really slippery. You may have experienced those, and they're very pretty, but they're slippery. Okay, so chain 1 to lock that bead in place, double crochet right next to the one that's already in there. Slide up a bead, chain 1 to lock it in place. All right, so all the way down you'll have 6 beads at the top of each stem, and then I'll show you what to do on that last one. And this is going to get kind of twisty, so just before you double crochet into that next one, just sort of make sure that this string is as straight as possible and that this is straight as possible. Okay, so I'm on my last one. I've got 2 beads left. Same thing. Lock it in place. Double crochet. Last bead. Bring that up. Lock it in place with the chain 1, and then go ahead and chain 3. 1, 2, 3, and at the very end of this original chain, just pop your hook in there and slip stitch to join it. Lift up your loop, cut your thread, and then just pull it up. Then what I do is I just take these 2, and just so there's no big gap, just tie those 2 together and leave these hanging because you can use these to sew, to start your sewing onto the end. So there is your Oya. And so it doesn't matter if yours measures the same as mine, it's a little smaller, a little bigger. What really matters is that they're all similar to each other. Yours are. When you determine the size of the Oya that you like and that you have, here's how you sew them on. So of course we talked about having an odd number so that we can either get that fourth one or that third one if you did 5 right at the tippy top of your stitch line. And so we're just going to pop a little pin right in place. I'm going to start a new thread because we want to start stitching from the top down. Then we can use these to stitch the rest of it in place. So of course all we're going to do is make sure that this follows the line. And for mine it looks like I can pretty much reach, and of course we've got to sort of manipulate this little guy, where the very first stem of my Oya thread looks like it's going to reach that line here. So I'm going to take a pin and just put that in place. And then this little strand will follow that line, and I think that's probably where I'll stop mine. And that way I've got this piece of Oya is on this side of that seam. So when I come to do this one, it won't interfere with this. They won't overlap, which you don't want. Okay, and then so this side, same deal. The very base of that first or last one that I did here, the end one, is going to connect with that leaf there. So put a pin in it. Okay, and then what I did was I threaded a needle with the same thread that I used the crochet, and that's what I'm going to use to stitch it on with. So I'm just going to start from underneath here and come out the top of your stitch line and then just pull up a piece. Doesn't really matter where, just make sure that you're catching the base of the Oya. And then of course you could take that pin out. Come up. And then to make sure that he just lays down flat, go into it. And then just through the back and the batting, just pick up another little piece, kind of at the base of those beads there, just so we know he's going to lay down nice and flat. Then come back down very close to where you came out of at the base again. And then pick up a piece of that crochet. Yours may look a little different. You may have extra crochet in here. You know, it may be bunched up like this one looks like it might be. And all we're going to do for that is just gather them as we stitch this down. So if you know, in the meantime, so that these are, you know, placed properly, just put a pin, you know, make sure it's lying down the way you want it to. They're all, you know, like this. If there's so much gather, you know, you don't want all of your things to end up down here. You know, you just want to try to make everything lay as flat as possible. So if you need to put a pin right in here while you stitch, then do that, you know, whatever is going to help you. And then to stitch it down, you can pretty much stay on the top here. I'm just going to go down into a V, make sure I'm following my stitching line in the background, and then come out a V, just like that. And if you have a lot of extra stuff in here, then you would come a little bit farther down that line and just make sure it gathers in. It really does work out. If you look at I had to do a lot of gathering on my first one. I don't really know why I'm not having to do so much this time, but my first one, if you look at it, it is a gather palooza. We will be sewing these down, but it's easiest to just get the line down first and then go back with that same thread and come up and stitch some of the background, or stitch the actual fans down, and I'll show you what I mean. You want to find where it's like chain 7. It's not quite halfway. and then just stitch that down. You're through the leaf now and through the background. So the line of that is nice and stitched down. And before we attack stitching these down, what I want to do is go ahead and stitch that line from here up to the center. So even though that looks too loose to stitch down, we're going to make that work. And actually, I can pull that down just a little bit more because that is a little farther away. There we go. Start as close here as you have it here. Just go under, pull it up, making sure you're catching that little piece, that base of the Oya. Down and up. I'm not going all the way through the back here, just through the top and the batting. Take that pin out now. And now just making sure that that line is going to follow. Now here, you know, as you pass each stem, sure, you could work that up a little bit and get that nail down and then come back down. But either way, I want to make sure that my base is good before I start putting a whole bunch of stitches in there. You know, we can get those nailed down when we do the tops of the fans. Okay. And so here's what I mean about gathering. So it looks like I'm going to have some a little bit extra here. So I'm just going to pull this down just a little and maybe even work behind it. So before I was going in front, you could go behind. Well, I guess I could go in front, just push it a little bit closer. And these stitches, because we're matching it to the back of the Oya, you won't even see that. I'm working into the V's. You know, stay as consistent as you can. Just basically just a little running stitch on top of the chains and on top of our following the line of the background stitching that we did. And just kind of spread everything out and make it as even as possible. Right, and then just make sure that that top fan just sort of follows up from that line. Bury your needle and your thread under the top so you can't see the needle, and then exit out in between the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, in the middle of these two beads. And then if you just pop that back down, and then maybe we stitch this part down. That's enough. You know, 2 little stitches is enough to just hold that in place. Just follow it down here, and then my needle is traveling in the batting, so I'm not all the way out the back. I can't feel the needle on the back of my hand, and I can't see it up the front. Right? So just sort of angle it so that it comes out between the 3rd and 4th bead up in the next one. Okay, and then just over this, back down underneath, come out underneath that little arc there, take a stitch, and then working in between the back and the bat, exit your needle between the 3rd and the 4th bead on the next fan. Come down the stem, and that's getting a little short, so I'm just going to pop that to the back, deal with that in a little bit. So you've got enough here that you could do the same thing, right? Just tack him down there and there and there. You could do that on all of them. And then just bury your threads into the back. 8, stitch them all on. Get them as much tacked down as you feel like you need to. Make sure that you're even here. Your fans are sort of lying the same on each leaf. Yours may come down even further. If you're using a 5, if you're even using the same as me and your crochet is coming out a little bit bigger, Yours may reach all the way down here, and that's okay. What I would watch for is to make sure that the fans don't overlap that middle seam, because otherwise then those will overlap. But there's nothing wrong if they match right here. That would be beautiful. Okay, so here is the mandala with the Oya or lace or whatever it is that you chose to put on, all stitched on. And so now we're going to work on the applique that goes in here. And this is a 4-piece applique set times 8. So what you want to do is just go ahead and grab out your fabrics for the 2 templates, F and H. Now the templates got a little big when I drew them out and I printed them. So just when you cut your template out, just shave it, just cut it on the inside of that drawn line so that you don't see any drawn lines here. And then this one too, and just make sure that that template fits inside there. So this is kind of how it will lay. We're going to do some other things under here, but we'll make these 2 first. And you just want to make sure that the F template doesn't stick out from the H template. And then the other 2 are just circles and a rectangle, so there are no templates for the 2 pieces that go underneath. And then your applique turning tools. These are applique tools, as I mentioned before, but the other ones that you could use is an orange stick. I forgot about that. There's a cuticle stick that looks just like this, you know, where it's flat on the end and pointy. Those work really good, and those are available everywhere. And then, of course, your applique glue stick and your one-sided fusible. This applique piece is going to sit 1 inch from this point, you know, so around like that, where the leaves are coming out, just out underneath these 2 leaves here. So just make sure that this sits flat. When we make the applique, it's actually going to puff up a little bit, but we want to leave a little bit of space. You know, they can touch these leaves, but we don't want it to look crammed in there. So as long as your template piece lays flat, and it's okay if it's touching the leaves, and is 1 inch away from here, that's a perfect template. Okay, so what you're going to do then is take the template and fusible. I like to draw these fusible side up just in case the shape is not mirror image. That way this is, you don't have to reverse everything. You know, a lot of times people will want to trace all this stuff on the paper side, but what that does is reverses the pattern. So I even do this on freezer paper on a non-symmetrical piece, you know, with the freezer paper side up. So you would just trace this. Now when we glue our edges down and we use this kind of material, this stays in the piece. In freezer paper the piece comes out, but in glue turned applique with interfacing, that interfacing stays in. So we need to make 8 of these, so draw 8 of these out, and they can be right on top of each other. We don't have to worry about the seam allowance on the fusible, just on the fabric. So go ahead and just trace 8 of these template shapes out. And while you're at it, you could go ahead and trace 8 of the F pieces as well. Okay, so your piece is going to look something like this. Go ahead and cut out all the shapes just inside the line so that all the pencil lines are gone. What you're going to do is press them to the wrong side of each corresponding fabric. So this is H and this is F. Okay, so you'll have something that looks like this once you've pressed all your applique interfacing fusible web pieces on to the wrong side of your fabric. Make sure it's the wrong side of your fabric, and then every time you lay a piece down, be really mindful of which way the glue is on the template. Make sure that that is obviously facing towards the fabric. You never want to touch your iron to the glue of that, so just look at it every time and make sure that the sticky, shiny side, it won't be sticky until it's, you know, until heat's activated, but make sure the shiny side, the fusing side, is down, wrong side of your fabric. And then now you're going to just cut them out, and you can notice, you know, I have a 1/2 inch between my pieces because we need a 1/4 inch all the way around. So just, you know, eye it up, cut these out with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. A little snip in there. And this entire applique piece is going to show, so we've got to turn all of the edges. So the first thing we're going to do is just pop this glue, and you know, incidentally, a normal glue stick that you would get at an office supply store would totally work here, but I find them to be so messy and clumpy and thick and big and ugh. So I've switched to the Quilter Select or the applique glue, which I love. So if you're using applique tools, this is sort of where you're going to want to be. I've got this flat side here, and that helps push that in. Same with the cuticle stick. And I like this sort of fork because once I curl that end under, I can hold it with the fork and then use the flat part of the stick. Hold the raw edge down with the fork part, and then use the flat part of that stick to smooth those out. And you notice I didn't put the glue all the way around the piece yet because I am in Colorado and it just dries so fast, and I put the cap on every single stupid time I use it. Okay, and then at this point, you can now take your hand and just kind of press it down. Okay. And always I start on that kind of outer part of the loop there. Hold it in place. And remember my little trick about anytime you're pushing the applique up, not starting here, but keeping that pressing, whatever it is that you're using for your pressing tool. And it's okay if it pops off. It's starting to get trained. Right along the edge of your fabric. Out. Take your hand and just press it in place. And we'll deal with those corners the same way we did on the freezer paper. And it'll want to pop off, and that's okay. Just like you said, you're really just trying to get these folds trained up and knowing where to go. So we'll turn it over. And again, just fold that little flag so that it meets the fold. Give it a good press. Fold that under. Alright, and then you have this great crisp little piece of applique. Okay, I want to take you a little closer in on this guy because we have a couple new things to worry about. We don't need to worry about this because this is getting tucked inside here, inside this applique. So we're not going to be too concerned with that. But this is a concave curve, which does need to be clipped. And how I always remember that is concave. It's like going into a cave. It's always that inner curve, and those need to be clipped. The outer curves, really, there's nothing too much that you need to do. But this is a pretty intense outer curve. So what I'm going to do is just one little piece of glue first. And then, as I've said, I like to start on that very inner part of the curve. And then holding that fabric down, just take the tool, and you see how close I am working against the fusible piece. And even here, what you may want to do is take the little pointy part and gather it in. And remember, I'm working really close into that piece, and gather it rather than just press it forward, just to hit that curve and make it rounded. And you'll get these. I mean, it's really, these are tricky little guys. This takes an enormous amount of practice, and I can't even say I'm really perfect. But I don't go for perfect, I can show you the best way how to do it, and it just know that it takes some practice. And do the best that you can. And some of the points and stuff you can address when you're actually stitching it down. So again, it's best even to take the point, hold the fabric edge loosely with this, and then just hold the gathers in place while you make them with the point. So that you have a nice rounded edge. Okay, and let's throw a little bit of glue in that center. Then you can take the flat part and glue those in place, and then just come back up and smooth out your edges there. Okay, and then a little bit of glue down the side just so we can tuck those sides in, and we'll probably just end up clipping off that bottom part, which is fine. Let's get back into our curve mode here. And then while the glue is still kind of tacky, you can sort of manipulate it a little bit. Go back to that pointy, go back to that flat edge, and then just get those sides down. And then that should fit inside and underneath the outer applique piece. So let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that looks pretty good. There's a few places where you could take your fingernail and just sort of scratch it out, smooth it out a little bit. And again, we can address that when we stitch it down. But this is good. This is good enough for me. I'm happy with that. And so, because we don't need to tuck that in and we want to reduce the bulk, as always, as much as possible, just clip this off, flush with the fusible. This gets placed inside of this applique, and then just pin it in place for now. The next step in our little 4-part applique is the third step, which is this little ruffle. I'm going to show you how to make that. The other thing you could do is take a piece of lace, you know, and use that as well. So it's up to you. I know we're doing a lot of teeny tiny little things to complete this applique, but as I always like to say, the devil is in the details, and it is. Every single little detail matters. So this guy is really super easy. You cut a 1 by 2 inch piece of fabric. This is your E fabric. And you can see I was not careful here. I didn't use like a rotary cutter or anything. I just used a pair of scissors. Just cut it out approximately 1 by 2 and fold it in half lengthwise. And we're just going to make a little gather, a little ruffle. So thread your needle, doesn't matter what color, because this is going to get hidden. And then just maybe 1/8 of an inch away from the bottoms and the side. Make sure you have a nice big good knot at the end. And just start to gather. You can gather the fabric onto the needle. You don't have to be really careful here. I may be taking 1/8 inch bites. And then just take it to the end, maybe again, 1/8 of an inch away, that's fine. And then what you want to do is just, you know where I'm going with this, right? You just gather it. Gather it so it makes a cute little sort of domey, fun ruffle. And once it's gathered, you could tie a knot here and call it good. I like to go one step further and just run it through all of those layers again. I feel like it just makes it a little stronger. And in 1 or 2 passes you could do this. This might be thimble territory here. And then there's your ruffle. And we don't want these raw edges to stick out. So one of the things you could do, and we can tuck those in and make sure they don't stick out when we sew them, but you could even take and just sort of bend it in if you feel like it's going to stick out and cause a problem. Run it through again. You know, maybe just kind of push that down a little bit so it doesn't stick up when you're trying to sew it all down. and then make a little knot. Clip it, and that'll sit right in there. So now we're going to finish out this last little applique bundle with this little cute bud right here, and that is with fabric G and I. So what we need to do is cut 2 1/4 inch circles out of both of them. And here's a template from Karen K. Buckley's Perfect Circles, which I absolutely adore. If you don't have them, definitely get them. They're really, really wonderful. But you know, even if you don't have it, rather than run around trying to find a perfect 2 1/4 inch template, I want to show you how to make any sort of circular template. So I'm starting with a 2 1/4 inch square, and I'm just going to fold it twice just to find the center. All right, and so the outer, where these points are 2.5, just because it's a 2 1/2 inch square. But to find that correct arc, and we really, in this case, we could guess and just clip that arc right here, but let me just show you just so you know how to do it. I am going to find my 1 inch mark on my ruler, and half of 2 1/4 is 1 1/8. So I'm going to put that 1 1/8 mark right here in the corner, and this is my Frixion pen, which erases with heat, and just make, let's line it right up with that corner, sorry about that, and then just make a little dot. And then spin it just a tad. Make a little dot. And then on the other side, 1 1/8 right in the fold there, right in the center. This way, it's just easier to take, you know, from here and connect the dots. And this is, don't be so worried about perfection here. This is close enough. This is close enough to a circle. And if you can see, when I put my 2 1/4 inch circle on there, it's almost identical to that curve. So and the great thing is you only need to do this once. So if you do it on your, right directly on your fabric, that's fine. And then just use this fabric to draw the circle around. Or of course, you could do this on paper or a piece of cardboard or quilter's template, and that way you have a 2 1/4 inch circle. So the great news is you only have to cut 4 of each circle of each fabric, because one of these is going to be good for 2. Put the right sides of your fabric circles together and fold them in half. And then take your scissors and just cut through both layers. Insert your scissor in that big hole there and just cut both layers right down the middle. And if you're worried about this raveling while we stitch the curve, you can throw a little bit of starch on here and just press it out. I don't find it necessary. We're doing such a little bit of stitching that this is not a problem. You can see. And that's going to get tucked under the ruffle, so we can leave that a raw edge, which is really nice. And then just thread your needle, make a knot at the end, as always, and then working a scant 1/4 inch. And by the way, when you see, if you're new to quilting and you see that scant 1/4 inch, all that means is it's less than a 1/4 inch. You know, it's kind of between 1/8 inch and a 1/4 inch, but just on the more on the 1/4 inch side. And you can see I'm just taking, I'm working a running stitch here, and I'm taking maybe 1/8, 1/16 inch stitches here. It doesn't have to be even. We want this to be more of an organic kind of fun shape, so we're okay if it's not super perfectly round, right? And so all we're doing is stitching along the arc. We're not stitching along the straight edge, because that's the edge we're going to use to turn this right side out. So it kind of lays flat. We're not gathering this edge. Make a knot, and then just leave your needle in there and threaded for now. Open this up, so the right side is out. And then take something smooth. Like I love this edge of the Frixion pen. I know this is supposed to be an eraser, but I just run it along the edge that I just stitched, sort of crease it. And you can see it's not perfectly round. It's round enough for our purposes here. Flip it over so that the inside, which is fabric eye, or really whatever you choose for your fabric, is up. And then take whatever side you want to do first. Just keep it consistent all the way around. I'll go right side, left side, like a little swaddling blanket, until you have that cute little bud in there. And see what I mean? How that's so much more interesting, that little curve in there, rather than being totally perfect. And then all you're going to do, just to keep that in place for now, you could throw some glue in there. Or just take your threaded needle and just run it a few times into the folds, to all the folds, just so it stays in place. This is going to get stitched down real quick, so you don't need to keep it in place for long. Make a little knot. Clip it. And then all this extra stuff down here, you can just clip that right away. Once you have all 4 of your applique pieces ready to go, times 8, you're going to go ahead and stitch them onto the background of the quilt. So what we want to look for here is to have this little bud be right on the line, centered on the line, and 1/4 of an inch away from the tip of that flower that we did. All right, so there's 1/4 of an inch. And then this is our outer applique, and we want that to be 1 inch away, you know, or so, because we have some fun things to do up here. All right, so once the 2 ends are in place, you can either pin or glue those down while you insert these other ones. So just before I do that, what it is going to look like, I'm going to hold it here, maybe slide that underneath, and then slide the ruffle underneath that. So once this is all stitched down, you're going to have this awesome floral piece. Now as far as gluing or pinning, I find pins get in the way. Pins are fine. If you're going to do pins, just get the very smallest pins that you can get. But I love this glue. Roxanne's Glue Based It. So if you are opposed to putting glue on, I totally understand. Use pins. That's absolutely fine. So again, we're going to go 1/4 of an inch away, and really one little dab of glue. I'm just going to put it on that center line there. That will hold that in place enough. You know, just that one line. You can't believe how strong this glue is. So a tiny little dab of glue here. Try not to glue. If you are going to glue, you know, you might even think about just gluing right here at the tip. You don't want to glue any of the middle of this applique piece, because what happens is it sticks to the back of the fabric, and then you're just going to have to worry about lifting it up later. So just put any glue that you do, put on the seam allowance, the turned seam allowance. Let's make sure we're keeping our 1/4 of an inch place, and applique stitch this in place. So where the needle's coming out, I'm going to go down under, and then about 1/16 of an inch away, just pick up a piece of that applique. Go down under, pick up the side of the applique that meets the background fabric. And we don't have to go too much farther than that, because we know that's going to get covered by the ruffle. So maybe one more. And then you can just kind of slide the needle underneath. And come out on the fold of your applique piece. That guy is stitched and really locked down. Okay, so my thread color is the same as this next piece, so I'm just going to go ahead and use this same piece. And then I'm going to put the ruffle on. And then I'm really just focusing on appliquing this edge down. So again, just applique. A lot of this is getting covered. And just make sure you work with the ruffles, you know. That was the whole point of the ruffle. Leave those folds in there. Go down, come back all the way up. Maybe through this. Little part here. And so we got that nice little ruffle in there. So you don't have to do every edge, just enough to get it nice and secure. Coming up through the fold. Right down. And even, you know, bring this ruffle, you can even kind of bring it up a little bit like this. And then stitch just through that fold. So you see I'm not even stitching on that edge because I want to take advantage of that ruffle I made. Now this guy sits right on top. And so from here, I would just take and applique stitch that right on top of that ruffle down to here. Okay, so I've switched to my beige thread. I'm still making sure that I'm an inch here. I've got that glued down. And then maybe starting at the corner, making sure that's all good and tucked in. Come from up behind and then just grab that little point right there. And I think it's just great if this just sort of grazes this leaf. It should be lying sort of right next to it. So let's strengthen that corner and get in there again. All right, and then down back into the corner and up on this side. And every 1/16 of an inch, just work your way down back. Going down right below it. Coming back up on the fold. Once you reach the corner, right before you go ahead and sew it down, just make sure that this corner is going to be similar to this corner, you know, as far as where it lands, you know, if this edge is touching, because this will bend up just a little bit, and that's okay, that's by design. We're trying to go for some cool texture here, so we're just going to pin this in place so that as we're sewing, it doesn't kind of go all over the place. Corner, and then go here, come up through the background before you go into your applique piece, come all the way up, then go into your applique piece, skipping that little bit right there. You don't want to put your needle through that, otherwise it's just going to bring it forward. So you're just going through that top layer, and that sort of pushes that extra fabric back behind there. So under, up through the fold, directly underneath and up through the fold, all the way down to that corner. Okay, so now all you have to do is finish out this to here. So you're just stitching, and as soon as you reach that point there, a little closer together maybe. And then down, and then at that point, of course, just bring it all the way through the back and secure your thread like you know how to do. Okay, so this is what your piece will look like when you're all done and your pieces are all stitched out. All you'll need next week are the same embroidery threads, flosses, and ribbons that you had for last week, and your needle, and we'll adorn the rest of these and add fun details, and then the week after that we're going to be ready to start working on the outside of the inner star. So thank you so much for joining me for part 4 of Mandala Unplugged. Enjoy your stitching, enjoy your moment, and we will see you next week.